Hey everyone, welcome to the Simplilearn's YouTube channel. Are you ready to unlock the doors to a thriving career in cloud computing? The job market for AWS is booming, and the companies are on the lookout for talented individuals like you. AWS holds a significant 32% market share in the cloud computing job listings, making it the go-to choice for many businesses. What makes AWS so appealing? Well, it's known for its cost effectiveness, scalability, and rock solid security features. However, to stand out and succeed in the job market, it's essential to be fully prepared to ace those interviews. In this video, we have compiled top 60 interview questions on AWS that will not only sharpen your knowledge but also boost your confidence when you are facing those crucial interviews. We have divided the interview questions by considering all the levels of candidates: beginners, intermediate, and experienced. We will cover important and also few of the most frequently asked interview questions and answers, along with the scenario based questions to prepare you to be ready for anything you face in the interview. Before we get started, if you are interested to dive into the world of cloud and get certified, don't forget to explore Simplilearn's Cloud Architect Masters program. This course is designed to equip you with expertise in AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud Platform right from the basics. You will gain mastery over the architectural principles and services of these three leading cloud platforms. Learn to design and deploy highly scalable, fault-tolerant applications and acquire the skills needed to evolve into a proficient AWS and Azure cloud professional. For more information, check out the course link in the description box below and the pinned comments. So, no more waiting around, let's get started.
Hi everyone, welcome to Simplilearn. Today we are going to discuss AWS developer beginner level interview questions and answer and some of the frequently asked questions also, right? So let us start with the first question of today's session. Which AWS service would you use to host a low cost static website and how? So in AWS, if you want to host a static website with the low cost, we have the option called ES3, right? So S3, as you know that it's an unlimited storage. S3 will provide an unlimited storage where you can store n number of objects, right? Where the data can be stored in any format. So first, you have to create one S3 bucket to host your static website. Then there is an option to enable the static website hosting. After that, you have to upload your content. Either it is HTML document, CSS document, or a CS files. Then you have to configure the permission and routing rules. Once you are done with overall configuration, then you are able to access that particular static website by using URL, right? Now, let's move on to the next question. How would you reliably store a log file on AWS for a startup? Folks, again, we are using S3 here with lifecycle policies. So now what is lifecycle policies? Here I am going to decide which particular object should be shifted to the different storage class at specific duration, right? So now these lifecycle policies are specially designed to optimize the cost. If you are storing the object for longer duration, at that time the cost will be low. So that is the reason in our scenario, if I want to store the logs in a cost effective manner, and that I'm going to shift into the Glacier. If the logs are I want to store for a longer duration, I'm going to store in Glacier. And these logs are durable. That means these logs can be maintained for long duration. Either it is 2 years, 5 years, and even more. Even it supports the versioning and encryption. So what is versioning, folks? Versioning is nothing but you are going to maintain the multiple variant of the same object. Then encryption. Encryption is the strategy where you are going to encrypt your data by using KMS or SSE S3 keys, right? Let's move on to the next question. How can you restrict S3 bucket access to specific IAM group? So for that, first you have to create S3 bucket policies. Then you have to grant the access to only specific IAM group using the policy condition. Then after that, you have to attach the required permission to the group. Let me take one example. I have testing department, development department, and production environment, right? So here in every group, I have 10 employees. Now I want to provide access to only testing team. At that time, I'll attach one policy to the testing team. That means the member of that particular testing team can access that S3 bucket. Now, within that, what we have the S3 bucket, now the testing team member can easily access by attaching the policy. So in that policy, you have the sufficient permissions, right? Now, let's move on to the next question. Explain the procedure to set up notification for file uploads in S3 bucket. So whenever user uploads any file, like if anyone uploads a file to the S3 bucket, at that time a user should be notified. So for that, we have to use S3 event notification to trigger SQS, SNS or Lambda, right? So on object upload. So now you have to define the trigger in the bucket's event configuration. Now, one of the user who uploads an object into the S3 bucket, at that time, automatically a user will be notified, right? So and so a user is uploaded a object. Now you will get the notification on a specific user, right? Now, let's move on to the next question. How can you enable the secure access to S3 file to an EC2 instance? If you want to access from EC2 to S3, then you have to create a role. You have to assign an IAM role to the EC2 instance with S3 permissions, right? So now it avoids using hardcode credentials and ensure the secure access. So folks, IAM roles are the temporary credentials for short duration that EC2 can access the S3 bucket, right? So now I'm attaching one policy to my role and then I'm assuming that role to EC2 instance. Now EC2 can be accessed the S3 bucket for 2 hours, 3 hours, up to 12 hours you can specify the duration, right? Now let's move on to the question number 6. How can you avoid an accidental deletion of an EC2 instance? So for that, while creating the EC2 instance, you have to enable a termination protection in a EC2 settings. So this is one of the feature of EC2 instance. While creating, you have to enable the termination protection in EC2 settings. Apart from that, even you can also apply the IAM policy that restrict the delete account for users or role. So now by using this policy also, you can restrict to delete your actions for particular user and roles also, right? Yes. Let's move on to the question number 7. Which AWS service helps monitor CPU usage on EC2 instance? So folks, in AWS, we have a service called CloudWatch, which monitors and collect the information, even which visualize the EC2 matrix. So here you can create some interactive dashboards where you can see some win gates like pie chart, line chart, everything you are going to see here. Now, after this, you can set alarms where it notifies when the threshold value is breached. Now, for example, if there is a EC2 instance which crosses a 70% of a data, now the threshold value is 70%. Once the EC2 crosses the 70% of a data, the user will be notified. The user will be notified by using a notification service called SNS, right? Now, question number 8. What are the initial steps to take to resolve an unreachable EC2 instances? First, you have to check the security group. Security groups are virtual firewall at EC2 level. You have to check whether the HTTP, HTTPS, SS traffic is allowed or not. Then NACL, network access control list. This is also one of the virtual firewall at subnet level. Then we have system logs, right? And then a reachability by using AWS console. Now we are going to use some EC2 serial console or create a replacement from AMI needed. Now, if I want to create the entire new by using the AMI, we can create the new one. Fine. Now, question number 9. How would you enable high availability for web application on AWS? So if you want to enable your high availability for your application, that means your application should be highly available. So in that case, you have to deploy your particular web application in multiple availability zone with elastic load balancer and autoscaling groups for a failure and traffic distribution. As we know that elastic load balancers are responsible to distribute a load equally to the number of registered targets. So now autoscaling group where it increases the number of EC2 instance, more traffic, and it reduces the EC2 instance when I am having a low traffic, right? Question number 10. How can an application be hosted in multiple availability zone? So if you want to host your application in multiple availability zone, then you have to launch the instances in a multiple availability zone under a load balancer, which ensure the shared storage or replicated database and automate the scale using autoscaling group. So these are the 10 questions what we have for a beginner's level. Now we are going to start with a beginner's level interview question for AWS developers, that to scenario based question and answers. So let me take the first question. What is AWS and name its core services? So folks, AWS is nothing but it's a cloud platform which offers the services like EC2 compute, S3 storage, RDS databases, and IAM security to build a scalable application. Now, let me take this next question. Question number 12. Explain the difference between EC2 and S3. So, EC2 folks, EC2 provide the virtual server for computing purpose, while S3 is an object level storage for files, media and backup. So, S3 is an unlimited storage where you can store any kind of a data, either it is a image, video, audio, PDF, document, any kind of a data you can store here. And here EC2 servers, what we have, it provides a scalable computing capacity based on demand. Now, the next question number 13, what is an AMI in AWS? AMI stands for Amazon Machine Image. It's a pre-configured template for EC2 instance that containing operating system, application server and application. So AMI is nothing but which contains the information about the what you are going to launch your EC2 instance, right? Which contains the detailed information, what kind of a operating system do you have, then what kind of a application servers you are using, and what kind of a applications you are using, that everything you will have the detailed information. Now let's move on to the next question, that is question number 14. Define IAM and its components. Users, group roles and policies. So folks, let me tell you, IAM stands for Identity and Access Management, which provide the access control for AWS services. And the components are like users, groups, roles, policies. So here within the IAM, you can create a separate IAM users where you have the separate username and password for that. Groups, where you can create a separate group, for example, development group, testing group, and even production group. So group, in that we have collection of IAM users. Now roles are temporary access that can be used for short duration. Now the policies are nothing but the protocols or rules what you have along with the permissions that should be allowed or denied, right? Now, a question number 15. What is an availability zone versus region? So folks, a region is nothing but a geographical area where you have multiple availability zone, right? Which are isolated data center for fault tolerance. Now, region is a place where you have, it's a geographical location where all the AWS services are available for you people. Now, availability zones are nothing but which consist of one or more data centers, right? So these data centers can contain thousands of server where the computation can be done. Now, the question number 16. What is the difference between EBS and S3? So EBS is a block storage for EC2 instance which acts like your hard drive. So EBS is a block level storage and even it's a persistent storage where you can attach with your EC2 instance. That's why it acts like your hard drive. So where you can install your operating system and all. Then S3 is a object level storage for storing and retrieving the files over the internet. So S3 is a online storage which provides unlimited storage where you can store any kind of a data, right? So now in S3 you can store any number of objects with any type of data, right? Now, question number 17. What is the role of security group in AWS? Security group is a virtual firewall at EC2 instance which controls the inbound and outbound traffic using a defined rules. So folks, here let me explain about the security groups. Security groups are virtual firewall at EC2 level which check all the incoming and outgoing traffic. That means all the inbound and outbound traffic. For example, whether the SSH is allowed or not, HTTP is allowed or not, HTTPS is allowed or not. So that will be defined in the security group. So whatever you are allowing, by default, all the incoming traffic is denied and all the outgoing traffic is allowed. So even if you want to customize, that is also possible. Let's move on to the next question, question number 18. What is CloudWatch and how does it differ from CloudTrail? So now folks, the main purpose of the CloudWatch is for monitoring and observing, right? And even you can track the performance metrics like log, events, alarm for your AWS resources and custom application. For example, if I want to monitor the EC2 CPU usage, then I want to set an alarm for Lambda function when it takes too long. Now, what are the components of CloudWatch? We have metrics, logs, alarm, dashboard. Now, if I compare with our CloudTrail, if how it is different from CloudTrail. So what is the purpose of CloudTrail? Now CloudTrail will be used to governance, compliance and auditing purpose, and even which tracks the each API activity and user action across the AWS account. Then what are the examples? Like who deleted the S3 bucket, when was a lambda function is modified, then to detect the unauthorized access attempt at that time, the CloudTrail will be very much helpful, right? Now, let's move on to the next question called, what is the default VPC? Question number 19, what is the default VPC and when it is used? So folks, here a default VPC is a pre-configured virtual private cloud that AWS automatically creates for each AWS region in an account, which helps you to quickly launch the resources like EC2 instance without having to manually configure networking. So some of the feature of default VPC is like subnets, one public subnet per availability zone in the region, then internet connectivity, internet gateway is attached, then route table will be configured, then security group NACL, auto assign public IP are available with a default VPC, right? And when should I use this? Let us consider I want to launch the EC2 instance without specifying the VPC or a subnet, right? And when you want to quickly test or develop the resources without complex networking setup, at that time, you can go for a default VPC. Now, let's move on to the question number 20. Explain the concept of shared responsibility model in AWS. Now, AWS manages cloud security, hardware infrastructure. Users are responsible for security in the cloud. That is data permission and configuration. So here, when it comes for the AWS responsibility, right? So in shared responsibility model, it defines the division of responsibility between the AWS and customer when you are using a cloud services. Now, security of the cloud, AWS is responsible. Like AWS manages the infrastructure security. So you don't have, like customer, don't have worry about the physical server. Security in the cloud means, so being a customer, you have to secure your data, application and access. Now, AWS is responsible for physical data center, hardware maintenance, AWS infrastructure security, and even global network. Now, customer is responsible for security in the cloud, like EC2 instance, infrastructure as a service, RDS, PaaS, S3 SaaS. So here, for these things, customers are responsible. Now we are going to discuss an intermediate level interview question for AWS developers. Here I am going to discuss some of the intermediate level interview questions and answer, and even some of the frequently asked questions. So now there is a question number 21. Mention some suggestions to reduce EC2 cost without downtime. So for that, you have to use some saving plans or reserved instances for predictable workloads. Now, you have to purchase the saving plan or reserved instances for predictable workloads, which offers up to 72% of a discount compared to on-demand pricing. And even there is no downtime is required. Now, you can use some auto-scaling and resizing recommendation using a cost explorer. So now there is a one more factor called auto-scaling, where auto-scaling groups can scale the instances based on demand, which ensure the using a smallest instance type that still meets the performance requirement, right? Then apart from that, you can use cost explorer to get the recommendations from AWS, right? Now, let's move on to the next question. How can AWS helps to reduce the latency in microservices architecture? So here you can use Amazon CloudWatch service, which is monitoring service now, and even X-ray service, CloudWatch X-ray service to trace the latency sources. And even you can deploy your services in multiple availability zone. So add cache, that is elastic cache, and even using the app mesh services. So now app mesh, which provide the low latency communication with retrace, timeouts and tracing, right? Now let's move on to the next question. How to implement a disaster recovery for application which is hosted in AWS. Here I can design with some backup and restore like pilot light or multi-site active strategies. So there are different kinds of strategies we have, where as per the requirement you can select the strategy using Route 53, which is DNS service, then RDS snapshot, where you can take the backups, and even S3 cross region replication. So whatever you are replicating in the source, the same thing will be replicated in destination. So that is the power of cross region replication. Now let's move on to the 24th question. How can you limit outbound internet traffic from EC2 instance? So in that situation, we can use NACL use NACL to block a specific IP ranges or a port that's subnet level. And even you can use some broad restriction across the many instances also. For example, if I want to deny all the inbound traffic like 0.0.0.0/0 except the specific destination, right? Now, there is another topic called security groups. So security groups that control the outbound traffic as at the instance level. By default, the security group allow all the outbound traffic and modify these to restrict the access, right? Then we have VPC endpoints. We have to configure that. These are the private access to AWS services. So it uses the VPC endpoint to access the AWS services without going over the internet, and even which helps you to restrict outbound internet access while still using the services like S3 or DynamoDB by using internet or gateway endpoints, right? Now, let's move on to the next question number 25. So, what steps would you take to keep RDS instance to be highly available? So, enabled multi-AZ deployment. So, use the multi-AZ option when launching or modifying the RDS instance. Now, AWS will automatically provision a standby replica in a different availability zone. So, failover will occur automatically if primary fails, right? And you have to configure the replica for load distribution and redundancy. So here, folks, you have to create some read replica in the same or different region. So they are not used. They are not used for failover, but you can promote these read replica to become a primary during outage. So this is very much useful for disaster recovery or read heavy workloads. Now let's move on to the question number 26. How to implement temporary credentials in AWS securely and scale. So for that, you have to follow the best practices centered around IAM roles and STS, right? STS is security token service, right? So here you are going to use AWS STS to grant the temporary credentials through IAM roles. So temporary credentials are which enhance the security by reducing long-term access keys to expose and can be used across the services and user. For example, federated identities, EC2 container, or any application. Now, even you can use here application can be assume a role via using IAM role based access policies. So apart from this, if you want to assume a role for a specific application, at that time you can use a role based access policy. So for that particular application, you can assume a role. Now, let's move on to the next question, that is question number 27. How to automate EC2 start and stop for a scheduled job, right? So here you have to use a CloudWatch events or an event bridge to trigger a Lambda function or a step function to create and terminate EC2 based on a cron schedule. So if I talk about the steps here, first you have to create the event bridge plus Lambda, right? So first option where you can use the event bridge plus Lambda. In that situation, you have to create a IAM role for a Lambda function, right? Then in step 2, you have to create a Lambda function to even in that you can specify how to start the EC2 Lambda and how to stop the EC2 Lambda. Then finally, at the step 3, you have to create the event bridge rules where you have to create some rule and then you are going to provide some cron expression for that one, right? Now, let's move on to the next question, a question number 28. What is the best way to require MFA for all IAM users in AWS? So for that, you have to set the IAM policy condition which requiring MFA. So you can attach IAM policy that requires some MFA, right? Then even you can combine with AWS organization SAP or IAM password policy to enforce the organization wide. So now you can apply the SCP to deny on MFA actions, or even you can specify MFA service control policies can be accepted the MFA and that password policies can be enforced here, right? Now the question number 29. How does AWS autoscaling prevent performance drop during a high traffic? So here we have the answer called autoscaling group, which monitors the load using the matrix and launches more EC2 instance automatically. So monitoring the performance. So first point here, monitoring the performance of a matrix, where autoscaling monitors the CloudWatch matrix such as the CPU utilization, network IO, request count, then even the custom matrix, right? So when the threshold is breached, then scaling policy is triggered and actions will be taken. Now, scales automatically. That means here, when the traffic increases, the autoscaling launches the additional EC2 instances to handle the load. So this ensures that no single instance is overwhelmed and always the better response time and more availability zones are utilized, right? And for better performance, always make sure that this should be integrated with autoscaling group should be integrated with elastic load balancer for smooth scaling. So now autoscaling works with the application load balancer or a network load balancer. As the new instances are launched, the ELB will automatically route the traffic to the healthy ones, right? Now, let's move on to the question number 30. How to disable the public access on S3 bucket but allows the specific user. So in this case, first you have to disable block public access at the bucket level, right? Now, after doing that, you have to use some bucket policies or ACL to grant the public access to specific object or a user. For example, I want to give user A and B and C should access the particular bucket. At that time, either you can use the bucket policies, where using the policy generator, you can do that. Either you can use the ACL to grant the access for that particular bucket, right? Now we are going to discuss intermediate level interview questions and answer. Scenario based questions I am going to discuss for AWS developer. So now the question number 31, what is autoscaling and how does it work? First, what is autoscaling? It automatically adjusts the EC2 instance count based on the load matrix or scheduled events, ensuring the availability and cost efficiency. So EC2 autoscaling. Now we are talking about the specific AWS autoscaling. It's a service that automatically adjusts the number of compute resources. Even it helps to maintain the performance, availability, and cost efficiency without manual intervention. So now how autoscaling works? AWS autoscaling works by monitoring your resources and adjusting the capacity based on predefined rules or metrics, right? Now, let's move on to the next question. Question number 32, difference between load balancer types ALB, NLB and CLB. Application load balancer, which deals with HTTP and HTTPS traffic with content-based routing. So, which works with SI layer 7, that is application layer. Now, network load balancer, which deals with a TCP UDP traffic with ultra low latency, which works with the particular layer called layer 4, right? Then classic load balancer is the combination where it works with the application layer along with the transport layer at the layer 4. So it's a combination of layer 7 and 4 which support the legacy version, support the basic load balancing also. Now, let's move on to the next question. Question number 33. Explain the life cycle. Explain the life cycle of policies in S3. So here in the answer, these automate the data tiering by transitioning or expiring objects based on the age. That saves the cost on stage management. So S3 lifecycle management or S3 lifecycle policies are the rules that automatically manages the storage classes or delete the objects, right, in your S3 bucket. So based on some specific criteria like age or when it was last modified, and even it helps to reduce the storage cost by moving a data in a more cost efficient tier or cleaning up the unused data, right? Let's move on to the next question, the question number 34. What is the difference between IAM role and IAM policy? So if I talk about the IAM role first, it's an identity that can be assumed by users, services or application to get the temporary permissions, right? And IAM policies, JSON document that defines what actions are allowed or denied on AWS resources, right? So these roles grant the temporary permission to entities and the policy define the actual permissions, rules assigned to the user, groups or role. So now what is the purpose of IAM role? To grant the access to entities, for example, EC2, Lambda, so they can perform the action. Now, what about the purpose of IAM policy? That specifies the permission for IAM roles, users, or a group, right? Now, let's move on to the next question. What are security groups versus NACL? So, security group and NACL both are virtual firewall, but security groups are virtual firewall at instance level, NACL are virtual firewall at subnet level, right? And here this is stateful, that means which maintain the history. Security groups are stateful, which maintain the history. NACL are stateless, which doesn't maintain any history, right? And even security group will support only allow rule, and here NACL will support allow and deny. Fine. Now, let's move on to the next question, that is question number 36. How does Route 53 provides high availability and fault tolerance? So it uses DNS failover, health checks, and latency based routing and geolocation routing to direct the user to the healthiest closest endpoint. Now, it uses DNS failure and health checks. So you can configure the health checks for the endpoint for your web servers, load balancer, etc. If one endpoint fails, the Route 53 can automatically fail over to healthy resources in another region or a availability zone. Now, here, when it comes for the latency based, where I am getting a low latency, all the traffic will be routed to that place, right? Latency based routing is nothing but where the traffic will be routed where I am getting the low latency, and geolocation routing to the direct user to the healthiest. Now, based on the location of a user, where exactly the user is located, based on that, the traffic will be routed, and that too for the closest endpoint. Let's move on to the next question, question number 37. What are launch templates in EC2? So, launch templates are reusable configuration templates for EC2 instance launches. And this is preferred over a launch configuration as they support versioning and multiple parameters. So, launch templates are reusable configuration that how to launch your EC2 instance, that to consistently and efficiently, right? So what exactly this launch template include? Like what will be the AMI ID, instance type, security group, roles, user data, and even EBS volume configuration, right? Now, let's move on to the next question, that is question number 38. Explain the difference between Aurora and RDS. So Aurora is high performance AWS optimized DB engine compared to standard RDS. It offers the better replication, recovery, and scaling. So now when I am focusing on RDS, RDS is a managed relational database for a multiple engines. Now same thing, Aurora, which builds on the database engine that compatible with MySQL and also with PostgreSQL. Now, what kind of a database engines are supported by RDS now? MySQL, PostgreSQL, MariaDB, Oracle, SQL Server. Then what about the Aurora? Aurora MySQL and PostgreSQL compatible only. So now, if I talk about the key differences between the performance, always the RDS performance is standard, and Aurora is up to 5 times faster than MySQL and 3 times faster than PostgreSQL. And here, storage will be limited per engine, right? But in Aurora, up to 128 TB automatically it will be increased. And here, when it comes for the high availability, here in RDS we have a multi-AZ deployment. One will be in a standby. But in Aurora, it's a built-in multi-AZ with automatic failover feature. Fine? Now, let's move on to the next question. Question number 39. What are placement groups and their types? Placement group is a EC2 feature that enables user to deploy their EC2 instance interdependently. That means here we are going to deploy the EC2 instance in a group that works with together. That means dependent on each other. So there are different types of placement groups we have. In that cluster, a low latency, that means the communication between the instances are quickly done, right? So here the multiple EC2 instances can be communicate with each other with low latency. Spread, where a fault tolerance in a single region in a multiple availability zone, a separate EC2 separate hardware with the separate rack will be maintained. In a partition where the large distributed workload, so up to 7 partition you can create in a single availability zone. If one partition fails, that doesn't going to affect the second one and third one. If second fails, that doesn't going to affect the first and third. If third fails, that doesn't going to affect first and second. So that is the power of placement group, right? Now, let's move on to the next question, the question number 40, that is AWS config. So now what is AWS config service, which monitor the AWS resources for a compliance and configuration changes. It supports audit trails and helps enforce the governance policy. So now config is a fully managed service that tracks the record, evaluate the changes of your AWS resources and their configuration over a time. Even as you can see here, it deals with compliance, right? So it helps with the compliance auditing, security analysis, and even troubleshooting by showing what changes, when and who made the changes. Everything you will get the detailed information, right? Now we are going to discuss about the advanced level interview questions for AWS developer, and even I'm going to discuss some frequently asked question also. So now let us start with the 41st question. Which AWS service is able to process the millions of IoT messages per minute? So the answer is AWS IoT Core, which securely connects billions of IoT devices to AWS, then ingest and process the millions of messages per minute from those devices, right? Now, when we are using AWS IoT Core with the Kinesis data stream, right? So in that case, here we are doing a real-time processing. For example, when you need a real-time analytics to custom processing or integration with the machine learning, now what will be the workflow? For example, we have one IoT devices that publish the data to AWS IoT Core by using MQTT. Now, in the next step, this AWS IoT role will route some message to the Kinesis data stream. Now, in the third step, the consumer, either it is a Lambda or Kinesis data analytics, which read the processed data. Finally, it stores and processes the data in S3, Redshift, or any other storage service, right? Now, let's move on to the next question called how to secure a data in transit at rest for a compliance heavy application. So now folks, here we are going to use some TLS or SSL for a encryption. TLS or SSL for encryption purpose in a transit and AWS KMS or CMK with the S3, EBS or RDS encryption address. So even we are enforcing IAM policy for access. So if I want to do encryption in the data is transit by using TLS and SSL I'm using. And now either even I can use the KMS also. Now I have the option with S3, EBS or RDS for encryption address. And that can be enforced with the IAM policies and access, right? Now, let's move on to the next question, that is 43rd question. How do you migrate a legacy on-premises application to AWS with minimal cost and downtime, right? So here we are going to use some AWS application migration services, agent-based replication service that continuously replicates your on-premises virtual machine to AWS. And even it cutovers are triggered when ready with minimal downtime, and even with support the major operating system and up to free for 90 days per server is available. And here we have a concept called lift and shift followed by optimization with autoscaling. So autoscaling of RDS, elastic, beanstalk also. Lift and shift where it moves the application as is to EC2 using tools like AWS application migration service, which is fastest and lowest downtime. Now, if I want to migrate my database, data migration. So here we have a service called AWS Data Migration Service to migrate your on-premises database to Amazon RDS or Aurora. Fine. Now, let's move on to the next question, question number 44. How can we implement the encryption key management with fine-grained control in AWS? So for that, we have to use AWS KMS with CMK and key policies. So key management service is a centralized repository where you are going to maintain the cryptographic keys. And here we have the customer managed keys and also a key policies that integrates with IAM roles and enable the key rotation, logging and tagging for your governance, right? Let's move on to the next question, question number 45. How to design a scalable AWS solution for near real-time global video delivery. So here you can use a AWS media convert or a elastic transcoder, right? So here we have a media convert, a elastic transcoder, that is legacy with S3, right? So media convert transcodes that raw video into the HLS dash or MP4 format. Then it triggers via Amazon S3 event notification or a step function. So finally the output is saved on a region to specific S3 bucket to optimize the CloudFront, right? So now this media convert will runs the asynchronously and supports a multiple resolutions, bitrate output, and even subtitles, thumbnails, and even DRM, right? Now, when it for the CloudFront CDN Lambda at Edge for content delivery network. Now, you are going to run some custom logic at a CloudFront Edge location. For example, the use case is signed URL, geo-based redirection, A or B testing, right? Like URL rewriting. At that time, this will be very much useful, right? Now, let's move on to the next question. That is question number 46. How services are efficiently manages and containerized monolithic application. So folks, here we are going to deal with a containerized applications, right? So now here some of the services, like we have ECR, where we are going to break the application into the services. For example, we have the ECS, Elastic Container Service, right? ECS or EKS with Fargate. Now ECS with Fargate is a serverless container management service. So there is no server provisioning or ideal for monolithic application. Now ECS with or EKS with Fargate. So here EKS is also orchestration service that deals with the Fargate with serverless concept. So where you don't have to need to manage your infrastructure. So EKS is a Kubernetes native workflow service, right? And that too, this is very much useful to deal with the complex or microservices transition, right? So this ECS, EKS are all our orchestration service. Now CloudWatch and X-Ray can be used for monitoring and tracing purpose, right? Now let's move on to the next question. Question number 47. How would you architect a multi-region active application? So here folks, you are going to use some Route 53 service like a Route 53 latency routing, then global DynamoDB tables, right? Then S3 cross-region replication and design for a conflict resolution and consistency. So first, when it comes for the Route 53 latency routing, from which reason I'm getting a low latency, the traffic will be routed to that particular region. Now latency based routing that sends users to the closest region, right? Then global DynamoDB tables. So here a global DynamoDB tables which deals with multi-master with built-in replication, right? This is best for NoSQL application, that too with low latency concern. And then we have S3 cross-region replication. So cross-region replication, that will be very much helpful whenever you write any data to the source bucket, that automatically will be replicated into the destination. So even what we have the design for conflict resolution and consistency, where we are going to maintain a same level of a performance, right? So now let's move on to the question number 48. How to implement centralized logging across multiple AWS accounts. So here central account, we have the CloudTrail, Cloud Logs, and even custom logs, right? So apart from that, even we have a option called OpenSearch or a S3 with Athena for querying purpose. Now, when it comes for the CloudTrail, where I'm going to configure to send the logs to the central S3 bucket, right? Now, even if I want to aggregate the logs, that is also possible at the organization level. Now I can use some CloudWatch log groups and even OpenSearch to implement the centralized log storage. Now, the next question is a question number 49. How to improve a slow global access to S3 hosted static website. So in that situation, you have to use a CloudFront CDN to cache a content at the edge location. As we know that CDN, Content Delivery Network, CloudFront is a content delivery network that caches the content near to the user, which reduces the latency and improves the performance, right? Now, if I want to use a CloudFront, that is content delivery network, that accelerate the delivery and even reduce the latency, right? So what benefits I'll get? I'll get the global edge locations, low latency, faster load time, and even with support the HTTP along with the DDoS protection, right? So here, first you have to enable the static website hosting, then you have to create some CloudFront distribution, right? So here you can see we have some tune cache headers for better performance. So here you have to add some cache control to the header in S3, right? So finally, you will get global access where it improves the global access for your S3 hosted websites. Now, let's move on to the next question. Question number 50. How would you enable Lambda function to access a private RDS database? So here first you have to deploy a Lambda in the same VPC. You have to configure the Lambda VPC access, set the VPC subnet ID along with the security group, right? So the selected subnet must have the access to the RDS instance and also a NAT gateway if you are using a Lambda which needs a internet, right? So now make sure that the Lambda should be available in the same VPC with the appropriate subnet along with some security groups and RDS endpoints to access within a private subnet. Now, RDS security group that allows the inbound from the Lambda security group on a database port, right? Then we have the Lambda security group. No specific inbound rule is provided, right? And apart from that, make sure that your RDS is in a private subnet. Your RDS instance should be in a private subnet, not public IP within the VPC. It ensures the listening on a specific port, for example, for MySQL 3306. Fine. Now we are going to discuss advanced level interview questions for AWS developer, and that too scenario based questions, right? So now let us start with the first question of scenario based, that is explain how KMS integrate with the service like S3, EBS and RDS. So KMS, which enables the encryption for data at rest across the services like S3, KMS, EBS volume encryption and RDS storage level encryption. So key management service that integrated with many other AWS services that provide the secure centralized encryption key management for data at rest. Now, how KMS will deal with S3? So KMS managed encryption, that is SSEKMS. When uploading object to S3, it specifies the encryption with KMS key. And S3 will call the KMS to generate a data key which encrypt the object using that and store the encrypted key along with the object, right? Now, the next point, how KMS is integrated with EBS, right? So EBS value can be encrypted by using KMS customer master keys, right? So it encrypts the volume data, then data in transit between the EC2 and EBS, then snapshot also. Now encryption is transparent to EC2 instances and automatic for new volumes if encryption is by default is enabled, right? Now the third, KMS with RDS. So now RDS support the encryption at rest using the KMS for automated backups, read replica, snapshots, right? So along with that, encryption must be enabled at the creation time, right? It's not possible to do a later. You can't enable that one. Now Aurora, MySQL, Push Server and Oracle all support the KMS based encryption. Fine. Now let's move on to the next question. Question number 52. What is AWS organization and how does it support multi-account governance? So AWS organization is a service that enables you to centrally manage and govern a multiple AWS account, right? So here it enforce the policies with the service control policies and enable the consolidated billing. So not only governing of a multiple AWS account, even it helps the apply to the policies, consolidated billing, and even which enforce the security and compliance across the multi-account environment. So what I'll get the benefit? I'll get the centralized management, where I can create and manage the multiple account from the single master or a master account. Then I can use the service control policies that restrict or allow to the services or action across the accounts. Then we'll get the consolidated billing. So pay one bill for all the accounts and share reserved instances or a saving plan. Then we have OU, that is organization unit, that group accounts logically, for example, at department level or environment level. And even you can do a delegated administration also, where you can assign a specific account to be managed at specific AWS services at organization level. Now, let's move on to the next question. Question number 53. Describe the use of AWS Transit Gateway. It connects the VPC and on-premises network via the single gateway, simplifying hub and spoke architecture and reducing prior complexity. So Transit Gateway is a centralized network transit hub that enables you to connect a multiple VPCs, on-premises network, and even other AWS account through a single gateway. So what is the primary use case of this particular Transit Gateway? So Transit Gateway can be used for VPC to VPC communication, hybrid cloud connectivity, multi-account network sharing, and even a multi-region network mesh. So how it works? If I talk about the Transit Gateway, it works with the spoke hub model. All VPC spokes and connect to the Transit Gateway, that is hub. And each attachment, either it is VPC, VPN or direct connect, each are isolated by default and route tables within. Now the next question is question number 54. Explain the difference between ECS and EKS. So both ECS and EKS are AWS managed services for running our containers, but these are orchestration engines, right? So ECS is AWS native and simpler, while EKS support the Kubernetes workloads. EKS offer the open source compatibility and container portability. So let me talk about the ECS here. Amazon Elastic Container Service. So now it's a native container orchestration service which is easy to set up and manage, where a less operational overhead. And this ECS is integrated with other AWS services, deeply integrated with IAM, CloudWatch, Load Balancer, and even etc. And here we have a Fargate and EC2 launch type. So Fargate is a serverless service and EC2 is a self-managed service. So here the Kubernetes are not supported in a ECS. So there is no any additional cost charges for ECS. Just pay for the resources what you are using. Now, at the next side, we have EKS Kubernetes orchestration service. It's an open source, which is highly flexible, highly configurable and portable across the clouds. So it supports the Helm charts, customized CRDs and even more. So it's have the own ecosystem and you can launch your Kubernetes in Fargate, EC2 or any EKS anywhere on an on-premises environment. Now, Kubernetes are fully compatible with a standard Kubernetes. And if I talk about the cost, extra charges for the control plane that you have to pay for it, right? Now, let's move on to the next question, the question number 55. What is the difference between spot instances, reserved instances and saving plan? So spot instances offer this step discount for fault tolerant. So spare EC2 capacity which is offered up to 90% of a discount, which is best suited for fault tolerant flexible workload. For example, batch jobs, data processing, CI/CD. In that case, you can consider this one. Now, reserved instances. So here reserved instances are for predictable workloads. So now in reserved instances, you have to commit for a specific instance type, region, operating system for 1 or 3 years. So that is the reason reserved instances are best for predictive workloads where already I know that I'm going to use for this particular 3 years. Either you can consider the example of databases or any application servers. So here you will get up to discount of 72% in a reserved instances, right? Then we have saving plan. So you have to commit. Here we'll get a flexible cost saving. You have to commit for a specific amount hour to compute for a 1 or 3 years of a commitment. You can use either EC2, Fargate or any Lambda function, right? So if I talk about the advantages, which is more flexible compared to reserved instances and even which applies automatically to eligible usage, right? Now, let's move on to the next question. That is, how does VPC peering differ from AWS private link? So, folks, VPC peering, which allows the bidirectional traffic between the VPC. Now, VPC peering, it's a bidirectional network connection between two VPCs that allows the instance to communicate as if they are on the same network. Now, if I talk about the use case, a full network access between two VPCs in a microservices, for example, a microservices in a different VPC, or a multi-account or a multi-region application architecture, right? Now, what is AWS private link then? Private link then provides a private access to the services over a ENI without exposing traffic. So now it's a secure one-way service access over a private connection using the interface VPC endpoints. Right? So now, if I talk about the use case, if I want to provide a specific service to secure to other AWS account, at that time I can go with private links. Let us consider the another use case. If I want to securely access to the AWS services like S3, KMS or CloudWatch privately, at that time you can go with private links, right? Now, the next question is question number 57. What is Event Bridge and how it is different from SNS and SQS? So, folks, Event Bridge is event-driven and schema-aware of SaaS or AWS services, right? And while SNS is a pub/sub and SQS is for messaging queuing purpose. So, Event Bridge is a serverless event bus that allows you to build a event-driven application by routing the event from AWS services like custom application or a SaaS application where you can target a specific function also, right? And when it comes for the difference from how Event Bridge is different from SNS and SQS, where you can see Event Bridge is event based. That means which push the with filtering concept, and SNS which work with pub/sub model, and SQS which deals with message queue, that is pull for a lambda message, right? And if I talk about the routing logic of Event Bridge, which routes based on the event routing, and in SNS which broadcast to subscribers, and in queue consumer will pull the messages, right? And here I can use the Event Bridge for the many cases like event driven workflow, filtering events. Then SNS can be used for the notification purpose, alert purpose, basic fan out use case. Then even now, if I talk about the use cases of SQS, you can use for decouple producers or consumers a buffer traffic. That is also I can use for this particular Event Bridge, SQS and SNS. Now, let's move on to the next question. Question number 58. Describe the security best practices for Lambda function. First, grant the least privilege IAM roles. So that means you have to use the least privilege IAM permission, assigning minimal necessary permission using IAM roles, and use the dedicated IAM execution role per function if possible. Regularly audit and roles and use IAM access analyzer. Then isolate a VPC access. That means securing our network access. Now you have to place a Lambda in a VPC if it needs access to private resources. For example, RDS. Use some security groups, NACLs to restrict our outbound or inbound traffic, and don't assign any public IPs unless the absolutely necessary, right? Now, you have to like enabling runtime logging, where you have to enable the data protection also, like using the environment variable encryption. You can encrypt the data rest using the KMS key. You can enable the HTTPS for all the data in transit communication. You can use the KMS encrypted environment variable whenever it is required, right? And even you can restrict the triggers as per your requirements, right? Now, let's move on to the next question. Question number 59. What are control tower and service catalog used for? So control tower automates the landing zone setup with the governance control. So control tower which automated the landing zone setup and governance for multi-account AWS environment. So if I talk about the control tower, you can set up and secure a pre-configured AWS environment across the multiple accounts. Even you can enforce the guidelines and automate the creation of AWS organization, account vending, and even single sign-on setup. So here we are purely focusing on the landing zone creation with the pre-built VPCs, logging, and audit actions, right? And this control tower is integrated with config service, CloudTrail service, even service control policies. Fine. And now at the next side, we have the service catalog that manages the curtailed resources for secure deployment. Now centrally managed and distributed approved AWS services like EC2, RDS, Lambda stacks, and even some predefined products, right? So when should I use this? It allows the teams to deploy your only approved infrastructure pattern, right? Now it enforces a cost control and compliance via a curtailed templates. You can create a self-services portal for launching the application with governance. And apart from that, you can use some cloud formation templates to define the product. You can control who can launch what by using the IAM roles, and it supports the versioning for tagging and products also, right? So here, this is all about the control tower and the service catalog why we are using, right? Now, let's move on to the next question, the question number 60. Explain the CAP theorem and its relevance to DynamoDB. Now, DynamoDB prioritizes a partition tolerance and availability, sacrificing the strict consistency unless strongly consistent reads are explicitly requested. So, there is a CAP theorem that states the distributed system, you can only guarantee a 2 out of the following 3 properties at one time, right? So 2 out of 3 following properties at one time. So here letter what we have, CAP, C for consistent, A for availability, P partition. So now consistency, every read receives the most recent write or an error. Now availability, every request receives the non-error, that is response without guarantee of freshness. Now partition tolerance, the system that continues to operate despite a network partition. So here, how this CAP theorem will be helpful, like CAP theorem in DynamoDB. So DynamoDB is highly available, partition tolerant, NoSQL database. So now it's specially designed to align with availability plus partition tolerance in the CAP model by default, right? So how DynamoDB will handle this CAP? So first, a partition tolerance, yes, in the DB behavior, availability, yes, but consistency is optional here. Consistency is optional here. Now, here when it comes for the consistency in a read and explicitly requested, so read consistency options in a DynamoDB, what we have? The first one is eventually consistent, which is default, and strongly consistent, always which returns the committed write, right? Eventually consistent, that provides some still data, old data. Strongly consistent, which provides the most up-to-date data, right? Yes. So this is all about the all 60 question, folks.
And with that, we have come to an end of this session on AWS interview questions and answers. If you have any queries regarding any of the topics covered in this session, or if you require the resources that we have used in this session, like the PPT or the list of questions, then please feel free to let us know in the comment section below, and our team of experts will be happy to assist you at the earliest. Until next time, thank you for watching and stay tuned for more from Simplilearn.
Staying ahead in your career requires continuous learning and upskilling. Whether you're a student aiming to learn today's top skills or a working professional looking to advance your career, we've got you covered. Explore our impressive catalog of certification programs in cutting-edge domains, including data science, cloud computing, cybersecurity, AI, machine learning, or digital marketing. Designed in collaboration with leading universities and top corporations, and delivered by industry experts, choose any of our programs and set yourself on the path to career success. Click the link in the description to know more.
Hi there, if you like this video, subscribe to the Simplilearn YouTube channel and click here to watch similar videos. To nerd up and get certified, click here.